I'm Cheryl, and I taught the craft classes at the main library. Okay, so today's class is going to be talking about commercial sewing patterns, because once you learn how to use your sewing machine and you may be able to do stitches and stuff, that doesn't mean that you can figure out how to use a sewing pattern. The commercial sewing patterns, there are four. They call them the big four. There are four major ones: Simplicity, Butterick, McCall, and Vogue. The first three are all owned by the same company, and you can get them online or at the store. Um, just to let you know, if you buy the big four sewing patterns online from their website, they are much more expensive than going to the store. The store usually has, they sell them at 40% off the list price, and this is Joann's or Hobby Lobby. Um, and check their sales circulars, because they do periodically, every few months, have ones where you can buy them for like $1.99 a piece, or I think $4.99 or $5.99 for Vogue. Vogue is like much more expensive than the others. Okay, so when you get your patterns, you got to think of them as recipe cards. When you're first learning, it's best to follow them exactly. But then after you're good and you know all of the tips and tricks and you get used to it, you can deviate from there and do your own spin on things. Okay. You also can find independent pattern companies. People do their own ones. This is one that I use that's, I do historical costuming. So this is an independent pattern company that I use for historical costumes or Victorians. The major sewing patterns from the major companies are going to be on tissue paper, and the ones from the independent companies are usually on actual white paper, which are much more heavy duty. If you are going to be using a pattern over and over again, these are very flimsy, and you can use them once or twice, but then they kind of start getting worn down and everything. You can iron freezer paper on the back of your sewing patterns. Freezer paper is like a white paper that's coated with a plastic, and you can actually put the plastic side down on the back. Make sure it's on the back of your pattern piece, and do it onto there, and then cut the pattern out, and that will reinforce it. When you go to buy, I don't know if you've ever bought patterns at the store, but when you go to buy patterns, they will have a book where you can look through, and it's organized by kind of garment, dresses or tops, pants, costumes, accessories, toys. And then you write down the number, and they'll have big drawers with the numbered, and patterns are in numbered order. And then you may find ones that have all the sizes in one envelope, or they may, if it's a big pattern and they can't fit all the sizes in one envelope, they may be broken up and have four or five sizes, smaller ones, and 4 or 5 in the larger one. So make sure you check. Also, independent pattern companies, you can actually get a better deal if you buy, a lot of them have a downloadable version, which basically they will email it to you. You print it out on your printer, and then you trim the paper and tape them together yourself. It's a lot more work to start with, but it is a lot cheaper. When you are first working with patterns and sewing, I recommend you start with larger size garments and not doll clothes. Don't sew doll clothes when you're first starting, because those pattern pieces are this big and they only have this much seam allowance, and they're a lot harder to learn to sew on. Also, you can look for, a lot of them have a label that says easy on them. Those are usually good to start with. They don't usually have things like collars and cuffs are usually harder to do. So stay away from those when you first start. The easy ones usually have, they don't have collars and cuffs, but on the back of the sewing pattern envelope is a fabric requirement. And I would check that first. Even though the pattern itself may be easy, it may be designed for fabric that is not easy. Okay, If it's designed for stretch fabrics, stretch fabrics, or like chiffons or flimsy kind of slippery fabrics, have a little bit of extra work involved. So even if the pattern says easy, um, keep with ones that are also for easy fabrics. And I'm going to show you on the pattern envelope where that says. Okay. I'm looking on my notes to see what I wanted to go over. Okay, avoid collars and cuffs. And also, if you can, avoid zippers at first. When you're first learning to sew, zippers are a whole other thing you need to figure out. So let's go over what's actually on your pattern envelope. When you come to the major commercial patterns, there are two different sizes. Most of them from a Simplicity, Butterick, and McCall are this size. Vogue is this size. So you can see it's actually like a quarter of again larger. On your front of your envelope is going to be different variations, and they should be labeled with letters. So this one is labeled with an A, this one is labeled B, and then this one is labeled with a C. I know that one's hard to see because it's just in the corner, but and when you get to the inside instructions, it'll tell you which pieces to cut out for which variation you're doing, or they call them a view. On the back, this is what the back looks like, and over here on the left are the views. And you know what? I'm going to start my phone up because my phone has a better camera and I can get up real close in there and show you the great details. So give me just a second. You should be seeing now from my phone. And that should be a little bit of a better camera, so you'll be able to see it a little bit closer up. Okay, so this is what the back of the pattern envelope looks like. On the side, you will usually see kind of line drawings. On the front, you see the front of the design, the front of the garment. On this, they will usually have what the back looks like, and they'll have all the seams and everything listed too. And it will tell you how many pattern pieces are included in the entire envelope. Now, up here on the top, it says fabrics. This one says crinkle satin, crushed velvet, and shantung. First of all, don't deal with velvet until you're got a little bit of experience. But that is what kind of fabrics you should look for. That's the kind that will give it the right drapiness to fit the pattern the way it's designed. And it gives you anything in specifically that's different. It will give you each pattern, each variation, and tell you what special fabrics are listed. So in this case, yoke is the top part in case it's a different fabric. And it says extra fabric needed to match plaids, stripes, and one-way design fabrics. This is very important because when it comes to laying out inside in the instructions, it has where to lay your pattern pieces on the fabric. And normally there'll be, you know, some will go left and some will go right, just to fit it on nice and neatly. But if you've got fabric like this, where it has a definite direction, or if you're working with velvet that has a nap, you definitely have to get extra fabric because your pattern pieces won't be able to fit. You can't put some left and some right. They all have to be facing the same direction. And otherwise, some of your pattern pieces will be upside down and right side up. And in the instructions, that will have directions that say with nap. That's what they call it because it was originally designed for velvet. They'll say with nap layout. And I'll open up the instructions and show you. Then on your pattern envelope, you should have something that says notions. Notions is everything you need aside from the fabric. This is your, if you need hooks and eyes, if you need a zipper, it will tell you that right there. And how much. Then it has body measurements. Now this is very, very important because these sizes on the front of the package are not the same thing as clothing sizes. Sewing pattern sizes are different than clothing sizes. You may be a size 10 in clothes, but in sewing patterns, you'll probably be a size 14. You should also, okay, so it'll give you the bust measurements, waist and hip, and back neck to waist to tell you how long the bodice is. And then they will tell you this is the size you should buy or you should cut out. Now, one thing I do want to tell you is about something called ease. That's how much room is built in to the pattern to allow for body movement. When it comes to sewing patterns, especially the big four, they have a tendency to add in extra ease because they think everybody wants a loosely fitted garment. So when it comes to something like this, where it's snugly fitted, the measurement should actually be about 2 inches. The pattern should end up about 2 inches larger than your bust for a snugly fitted garment. If it's more than 2 inches, it's going to be kind of loose. So before I cut it out, I measure all the pattern pieces, and sometimes at the bottom, it will give finished garment measurements. And so this one, say, is 46. This is going to end up being 46 inches around. And that's for a bust of 44 inches. So that looks like it'll probably be okay. If they don't have this on here, you might want to measure the pattern pieces and add them up to see. Because if it's more than 2 inches for a normal kind of close fitted, it's going to be a little too big. And a lot of times they will be like that. And you'll have to cut out a smaller size. Also, one thing about these bust measurements is they are fitted for a size B cup. Okay? If you have a larger than B cup, measure around your chest, not the biggest part of your bust, measure up like underneath your armpits and cut out that side, and then take that size of the pattern and get yourself an alteration or fitting book. The library has several. It's how to fit garments, and do what they call a full bust adjustment to the pattern. Because if you have like a D cup and you cut out the size for your actual bust, your shoulders are going to be too big. It's easier to cut out the smaller one for your upper chest to get the shoulders right, and then take the pattern and adjust it for a larger cup size by using instructions in a book. Just to warn you. Also, as you're going along, you should test these things out as you're sewing the pieces. Hold them up to your body, pin them up, try and figure out if they're fitting. It's a lot easier to change something when you're in the middle of it, if the pattern is not quite working right. Then get it all finished, try it on, and then it doesn't fit in like the waist. It is perfectly fine for you to cut out your bust size as one and your waist size as another if you're in between sizes.
you are allowed to like draw a line on the pattern and follow that line instead of following exactly to a T. That is perfectly okay. Then on the pattern piece, it will tell you how much fabric to buy for that size. And they have different, this one only shows it for 45-inch wide fabric. There are two different main sizes for fabric, 45 and 60. And when you buy it, it will say on the cardboard piece with the price, it will also say how wide it is. And so that will tell you how much to buy in that. And like this one says interfacing. Interfacing is considered a fabric. So it's not listed up here under the notions. It's listed down here under interfacing. Now interfacing is something that goes in between, it goes on the back side of the fabric. You can either get fusible or sew in. Fusible, you iron down to the back of your fabric piece, and sew in, you would actually stitch it to your fabric piece, and then you sew the pieces together. So that's the envelope of the pattern. Inside your patterns, if you get the commercial big 3 or big 4, will be on tissue paper, and they will be folded up kind of like a map. You will take these apart and get some space to spread out because you're going to need it. And then you're going to want to trim or cut out the pieces you need. Don't cut them exactly out, just cut around them to separate them. Okay. Now, don't go ahead and use this on your fabric like this. See all those wrinkles and everything in there? If you put that down and cut around, this is actually going to be make your pattern piece a little the wrong size at the edges and things. Iron your pieces. Cut out the pieces that you need. Put the rest of fold up the rest of the tissue paper and put it back in the envelope if you can, nice and neatly. And then take your iron and turn off the steam. Put it on high on cotton. Turn off the steam because you don't want water getting on this. And then just iron this like it is. And believe me, your iron will not go up high enough to burn this because paper burns at 451 degrees Fahrenheit, and your iron doesn't go up that high. So iron all the wrinkles out before you use it. In your pattern, you will also have an instruction sheet. It has drawing of which ones of the different designs, front and back. It has which pattern pieces, all the different pattern pieces are numbered. And it tells you what that pattern piece is by number and which, if it's only for one of the particular views, one of the particular variations, it will tell you which variation it will go with. If it doesn't say which variation it goes with, you cut it out because they use it with all of them. Here is your layout, your cutting layout. And of course, your different sizes, your different size of patterns you've cut out are bigger or smaller. So you will sometimes see, if you have a lot of variation inside it, you will sometimes see each layout, each size will have its own layout. This one, it's using all of them. But see how it says, and it says this is 45 inches. This layout is for 45-inch wide fabric. And it says with nap. Okay. Make sure if you do have the one-way fabric, like this, where there is a right top and a bottom, make sure you use a layout that says with nap. That will keep all the pattern pieces facing the same direction. It will also tell you selvages and fold. So these pattern pieces are going to be cut with the fabric folded in half lengthwise. Selvage is the long edge of the fabric. These pattern pieces will be cut with the fabric folded lengthwise. So this is the one where the first one, so it's folded like this. And if you see one like this where it has selvage at the top and bottom, the fabric will be folded into like this. And also on this pattern piece, you usually have kind of a directions on what the little symbols, and we're going to go over that too. It will also tell you on the big fabric, the big pattern companies, it's 5/8 inch seam allowance. So you will sew 5/8 inch from the edge unless otherwise stated. Sometimes they will tell you in the instructions to use like 1/4 of an inch. But if it doesn't say that, always use 5/8 of an inch. Okay. Also, if you look at the layout, the ones that are white, you lay right side up. If it's dark, you lay it upside down. I don't know why. That's the way they tell you to do it. Okay. And then it will go into the interfacing layout also. Then it will start in on the sewing instructions. It should give you a little legend about what colors are what, but just in case, these here where it's dark, this is the right side of the fabric. Where it's white, that's the wrong side, because you're generally going to be working on the wrong side of the fabric with the right sides together. But this is going to tell you which is which. If it has little cross checks on it, that is interfacing. And if it has little dots, that's your lining material. So, and it has the directions, and then it has little pictures. I would read through the directions completely first to kind of get an idea of what steps you're going to be doing. Okay. When it gets farther in on the instructions, some of them will have special instructions just for view A and view B. So if you're doing B, you can skip this part if it says view A. So be aware that some of these will only be for certain views, not all of them. And now putting them back together, they fold like maps. All right, so now I'm going to talk about some of the symbols that are on pattern pieces. You can see this on every pattern piece. You will have what the pattern number is, so that if you mix up your patterns and don't remember that this is what this pattern goes to, this piece goes to that. This is the piece number, which one it is, and it will tell you how many to cut. And if there are some that you have to cut with interfacing or lining, it will say like cut 2 in fabric, cut 2 in interfacing, and cut 2 in lining. It will tell you that specifically. When you see a straight line with arrows at the end, that's called your grain line. Now your grain runs lengthwise down your fabric. So when you put this on your fabric, you want to line that up parallel to the edges of your fabric. So if this is my fabric here, this is my edge or my selvage. This arrow needs to be lined up the same, it needs to be lined up parallel to that edge. And you can even get your yardstick out and measure that it's the same distance from the edge. Because if fabric along this thing is not very stretchy, but if you pull it crosswise, it stretches. That's called the bias. And if you happen to have this tilted on parts that you need straight, it's going to stretch, and that's not good. So you have to make sure those lines are lined up parallel to the edge. Now you will also see sometimes on your pattern pieces, when you pull them out, sometimes on one of the sheets, it will actually say somewhere the finished sizes. If you can't find it on the back of your pattern envelope, this one here, I found it on one of the sheets. It says for the waist, actual measurements for what the waist should be. And it says the total ease above your body measurement is approximately 3.5 inches. That's a little bit much for a waist. You should have 1 to 1.5, somewhere around there, bigger than your body. 3.5 makes it a very loose waist. You may like that, you may not. In that case, if I wanted to make that down on my pattern piece here, when I cut it out, some of these, you will see they do all of the pattern pieces of the different sizes together. And so you would just cut out and follow along the one that is your right size that you've determined. Over here, it's not so hard to do. Over here, where they're close together, it's a little bit difficult. You just have to remember, if you're doing 16, it's 1 in from the outside. So you would just have to follow along there like that. If you want to go down a size for your waist, so let's say you're here at 16, this is your waist. If you see this little double line, it's marking the waist. It says right, let me move it up here a little bit. This double line says marking your waist. So if you need to go down a size on your waist, but the bust is fine, you would have to from here to here, you would have to gently, gradually draw a line and try and follow the curve so that it looks natural. And that's where you could cut out along that line. You may also see, I don't know if this one has one. Okay. This one doesn't have one, but if you see a line that says shorten or lengthen here, you don't want to just chop off the hem. If it's, or add more to the hem, because that might make the flare of the skirt or the pants a little bit wrong. So if you want to lengthen or shorten a pattern piece and it has a little line that says shorten or lengthen here, to lengthen it, you'll just cut along that line, spread it apart the amount that you need to do it, and tape a piece of paper in there, and then draw the side edge to connect the dots. Same thing if you're shortening it, you would just kind of give it a little fold and tuck to fold the pattern piece shorter. By the way, if you're shortening it, If you want to shorten it 1 inch, remember to fold it 1/2 inch, because it's going to be folded twice in that little fold. That's always good to know. If you see a symbol that looks like this on the edge with a kind of a square line with an arrow pointing to the edge, that means to place that pattern piece on the fold. When your fabric is folded, you will put that along the edge of your folded fabric. Now, when your fabric is folded like that, first of all, wash your fabric before you cut it out, because fabric tends to shrink the first time it's washed, and you don't want the finished pattern pieces shrinking. So wash your fabric, iron it, fold it in half. Do not iron the fold into that. Do not iron a crease in that fold. You may think, oh, well, that'll make it a nice sharp edge that'll be along the fold, and that'll make it really precise. But if you iron a crease into that fold of the fabric, you may not get that crease back out again. So just try and get it, fold it and push it down with your fingers and pin it in place, and just try and get it as close as you can. Let me put these aside, and I'm going to go back to the smaller pattern piece. Okay. Now, if you see other symbols like notches or circles, these are used to match up the pattern pieces. Okay. Notches, when you cut them out, you can either cut a little snip right where the center is, like that, or you can cut it with a notch outward like that when you cut it. Whichever one is works for you. I tend to just cut a little tiny snip right there to show me where the center of the notch is. Do not cut very deeply into your fabric edges though, because you only have 5/8 inches to play with here. And you don't want to get close to that 5/8 inch when you snip it. Okay. These little circles, basically you will match those up when you sew. Those are usually, they will usually tell you something like stitch in between the dots. You're like, okay, well, all right, well, the problem is when I'm stitching it, I don't have this pattern piece. How do I mark it? You have options. The traditional option is what we call tailor's chalk, which is actually a soft chalk that you can use to mark the fabric with. That will then brush off with a brush. This is an old style. Nowadays, we have markers and pencils. Depends on how dark or light your fabric is. You can get a pencil that is basically like the chalk in pencil form. Blue is for light fabrics, white is for dark fabrics. And this particular one can be brushed off, or this one will actually remove with water. So these are good to know. Or you can have markers. Don't use regular markers. These are special for fabric and sewing. Blue one will be erased with water. So only use these on this one on fabric that can take water. So like your delicate silks that you're going to dry clean, don't use the blue one on that. Use the purple, that purple or pink, that is usually air. It removes, it disappears after 48 hours, sometimes 24. This one also can be removed with water, but it will disappear on its own, which means Don't use the purple or pink one if you're going to be cutting out the pattern one week and then sewing the pattern up the next week. Like you can only sew on the weekends. These will disappear before you get to sewing it. Also, when you have these, like it's the disappearing one, do not iron over them with the marks, because sometimes the heat will set the ink. Do not iron fusible interfacing over your marks. Your mark will never go away. And if it shows on the wrong side of the fabric, you're in trouble. I know, because I did something like that once. And I had to cover it up with like trim. What you want to do to make these marks from your pattern is take a pin. So make sure this is on the wrong side of your pattern piece. Put a pin all the way through it, lift up the pattern, and mark where that is so that you know. And of course, you will do this with the marker or whatever, it's more precise. But there's your mark on your thing. So using a pin like that straight through it and just lifting it up and mark where the pin goes through the fabric. Do this for all those dots. Also do it for any dart markings, which is darts are under your bust and at your waist to go down into your hips. They're the thing that curves the fabric into your waist. Mark those with the markers or the pencils also. So transfer all those to them. You can cut them all out like this, cut out your fabric and then transfer all your markings right away. I tend to cut mine out and I leave these pinned to the fabric until I'm ready to sew it. That's just my process, and so I will leave it pinned to my pieces of fabric, and before I sew them I will check to see if I've transferred the markings. If I haven't, I'll transfer them then before I take off the tissue paper, and then I will sew the pieces together. Now when you're putting this down onto your fabric to cut, you want to pin it to your fabric. You want to pin near the edge like this and in the same direction as your line. You want to pin close to the edge, because if you're using a delicate fabric and you pin closer into the edge, your pin holes might show on the delicate fabric, and you don't want that. So pin right near the edge and parallel to it. And you want to do this every, I usually like to do it like every 6 inches and at every corner. That will hold all the edges down nicely while you cut. Oh, if you have, if you're doing like buttons or things like that, it will also have a symbol with the buttonholes, and you want to mark those to say where to place the buttonholes. Although, when it comes to buttonholes for like a shirt or something, I always put a buttonhole right at the bust, right at the heart of the biggest part of the bust, because that's where I usually have gaps. So I will measure how far apart my buttons and buttonholes are on the pattern, and then I will put one right, let's say that's the top of you, that's right where your bust is. And if they have a buttonhole here and a buttonhole here, I ignore the ones on there, and I will measure, like if they're 2 inches apart, I will put one right there at the center bust to prevent gapping, and then I will measure and I will mark my own buttonholes every 2 inches, just to prevent that issue, because I swear some of these things were designed by men who don't know what bust gapping is. Reading my notes here. I've done pinning. Oh, you don't need to use pins if you have really delicate fabric. You can buy pattern weights, which are heavy things that will hold it down without pinning it, or you can just use heavy objects like this, you know, that will hold things down. And that is perfectly fine to do it that way and cut them out if you're worried about delicate fabric with pins, or if you're one of those people who always pokes yourself with the pins and you want to avoid bleeding on your fabric. Use pattern weights. You'll need to be precise, because if you go outside by this like 1/4 of an inch out here, and you may think, oh, it's only 1/4 of an inch. Well, yeah, but if you do that on all your pattern pieces, you may end up with 1.5 inches total more fabric around than you thought you wanted. So be precise on those lines. Okay, putting the pattern back into your envelope. This is the hard part, honestly, putting that pattern back, because you've ironed everything all flat. You don't have those creases to refold it. If you're good, you might be able to look at this pattern piece and say, oh, okay, so I can fold it this way, you know, and then this way, etc., and get it back the way you started. And you know who you are if you're the kind that can fold nice maps back together again. Okay, that's good. That can go back in the pattern envelope the way it is. But if you've got all these big pieces that you have now ironed all of those creases out of, you can iron creases back into them. Because people tend to go, oh, we'll just try and do this and we'll just shove it in there. Well, your best bet is to take all the pattern pieces, lay them on top of each other, fold them, iron a crease in there, fold them again, iron the crease in there so that you're getting it as flat, as tidy as possible, until you get one the size that will fit into the envelope. Iron everything down like that, then they're easier to go back in the envelope. That's the way I do it. Some people don't bother. Some people just take a gallon-sized Ziploc bag, put the envelope in there, and fold all the pattern pieces and put them in there. And they don't even bother trying to get them back in the envelope. Which one you do is up to you. And storage. I'm going to switch back from my phone because I'm done with all of the close-up stuff. Okay. Let me know if you can't hear me. Okay. Alrighty, so storage. They sell boxes, or you can put them in tubs. I have a sewing room with a lot of bookshelves, and I like my sewing patterns out so I can go through them a lot. So this is what I store mine in. This is a tub that I bought on Amazon for refrigerator stuff. This goes in a refrigerator. It's a heavy duty plastic. It has handles, and it is just perfectly wide enough to fit patterns from the smaller ones, with a little extra left over to stick a couple patterns in the side. Now, the big Vogue ones won't fit sideways in it, but if you do it this way down the long side, they will fit fine. This is what I use, and let me measure this so that I can tell you what size it is. It is about 13.5 by 7.5.
And these fit on my bookshelf side by side. They stick out over the bookshelf about yay much, but that's fine for me. And I just have these sitting side by side on my bookshelf. One of those adjustable ones, and I have a bookshelf with the adjustable shelves so that I put just like this much room above each one so that I have them all just there. And I've got labeled, because I'm a librarian, I like to organize stuff and sort things, you know, like the Dewey Decimal System. All what is in this tin I put here. So I sort all of my things. This one happens to be one of the costume ones. And this one has retro patterns from the 1960s, fantasy and cosplay patterns, accessories, and the start of my modern blouses. And then within them, I have my historical ones organized by year. And then I just have them organized by however I put them in. Okay, and so that's how I store my patterns. Okay, are there any questions? I don't see any questions. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I'll talk to you about where I'm going to put the video and things like that. Okay, all right.